We'll continue in our lesson series addressing these questions here. Last time we looked at how do cells get energy, and they're breaking the chemical bonds of food molecules like glucose, for example. In this lesson, we'll address why are cells so small, and it's related to how cells get energy. Let's remind ourselves that a food molecule like glucose has potential energy stored in those chemical bonds. It took energy to make those chemical bonds, and when those chemical bonds are broken, energy is released. And we said a team of proteins is responsible for breaking the chemical bonds of food molecules and liberating the energy here. In our cartoon bacteria cell here, that process is shown up here. We have glucose being imported into the cell through a protein inserted into the membrane. So it's like a little channel protein. Its job is to transport glucose across the cell membrane into the cell. And we have a team of proteins that are going to begin the process of breaking the chemical bonds of glucose to release energy. Now, we have an interesting situation, however. If we think of glucose as an energy molecule, why not just use this to power the chemistry of the cell? Why break it apart in the first place? Because as we'll see in a future lesson, down here we have a scene where another set of proteins, this particular protein, is performing a chemical reaction, building a certain molecule out of two precursor molecules, two nutrients in food. The red and the green molecule are going to be linked together, and that chemical reaction requires an input of chemical energy. Well, why not just use glucose as the source of energy for the construction projects in the cell? And the reason, we'll just kind of boil it down using an analogy, is that the chemistry that occurs in the cell requires a certain quantity of energy. And if we use a banking analogy, it's as if the proteins that perform chemistry need $1 worth of energy. But glucose, in all of its chemical bonds, has $30 worth of energy. So the cell has a problem. So glucose stores $30 worth of energy, but many proteins need only $1 worth of energy to perform their chemical reactions. So the solution to this problem is going to involve, in a sense, the cell transforming or converting the glucose molecule with lots of energy into another kind of molecule that has more usable quantities of energy. And we're going to call this system the bank. It has a technical name, the electron transport chain, but we're going to think of it as the bank of the cell. And what the cell is going to do is make an energy conversion. Now, a cautionary warning here, life is very complex, and we're not going to get into the details in this course, but we're just going to sort of use an analogy to get the idea across what cells are doing. What cells are going to do is they're going to take that $30 worth of energy stored in glucose, and they're going to convert that $30 worth of energy into molecules that store $1 quantities of energy. These molecules are called ATP. So the solution to the problem then is that the energy of glucose is going to be stored in another chemical bond of another molecule called ATP. And each ATP molecule then will have a fraction of the energy stored in glucose. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine, that's the molecule, part of the molecule shown here in blue. Ribose is a sugar unit, and here we have 3 phosphate groups. It's the chemical bond between these last 2 phosphate groups that is the energy that will be sort of repackaged from glucose to that chemical bond right there. So we're going to need multiple ATP molecules to store the quantity of energy that was originally stored in one molecule of glucose. And we're going to kind of roughly estimate it to be about 30 to 1. That's not exact, but we'll say that glucose has $30 worth of energy in one molecule. And what the cell's going to do is kind of convert that into 30 molecules of ATP, each possessing $1 worth of energy. So again then, as glucose enters the cell, a team of proteins is going to start breaking these chemical bonds. The released energy is going to be repackaged into another kind of molecule called ATP that has just the right quantities of energy to that are needed by the proteins performing the chemistry of life. So now we can get to the question of why are bacteria microscopic? And the answer has to do with these proteins that are involved in the banking system, the energy conversion system of the cell. So energy production utilizes proteins on the membrane of the cell. Now here we're just showing one set of these proteins involved in converting the energy of glucose and repackaging it into ATP. But the membrane can be studied with many examples, many versions of each of these proteins. Nevertheless, there is a limitation to how many energy-producing proteins can be inserted into the membrane. So the surface area of the membrane limits energy production. Because the energy-producing proteins are in the membrane, the total amount of membrane surface area is going to put an upper limit on how much energy can be converted. And now then, that's going to help us understand why cells must remain small. In this picture on the right here, we see a cartoon bacteria cell here, and then the word production and need here. So the word production refers to the energy producing and converting capacity of the cell by those proteins inserted into the cell membrane. And need will be the energy needs of the cell to carry out the basic chemistry of life. Now, as a cell grows, you'll notice that the word production is being written larger here in a larger font. That indicates that as the cell grows, there's more membrane surface area. So you can insert more of those energy producing proteins into the membrane, and the cell can make more energy. But notice the word need is also getting bigger. And we'll see that as a cell grows, while the energy production does increase, the energy needs of the cell increase faster, and that poses a problem for the cell. So let's read it like this. When cells grow larger, there is more membrane surface area, and so more room for the energy-producing proteins to be inserted into the membrane. Thus, energy production can increase with larger cell size. That's shown here by the word production getting bigger as the cell grows. But the energy needs of a cell are related to the volume of the cell. In the cytoplasm, that's the fluid where all the chemistry of life is happening, energy is used to build the cell's molecular parts. Thus, a larger cell volume means more molecular parts that require energy to carry out the chemistry of life. As a bacteria cell grows larger, its surface area does grow larger, but its volume grows faster than its surface area. Thus, cell growth creates an energy shortage. Cells must remain small. How do they maintain their small size? They divide. So as a cell grows, it starts to have a greater and greater energy need that cannot be met by the proteins in the membrane of the cell. So when cells get big, they face an energy shortage. Mathematically, surface area grows in proportion to the square of the radius of a sphere, but volume grows in proportion to the cube of the radius. So this is just a geometric fact about life on Earth. Life is cellular. Life has a geometry on Earth. And as cells get bigger, they face an energy shortage. They must remain small. Animal cells also face the surface area problem because they import food across the membrane. Larger cells cannot import enough food to meet the energy needs of the chemistry in the cytoplasm. So animal cells, too, have a problem. They can't get too big, or they face an energy shortage. But how are animals so big? Oh, well, organisms can achieve larger size by being multicellular. Each cell is small enough to meet its energy needs, but the cooperation of many cells allows an organism to reap the benefits of larger size. So each individual cell has a size limit, right? It can't get bigger and bigger and bigger because then it won't be able to import enough energy to meet the energy needs of the growing volume of the cell. But if you can attach multiple cells together, you can have large size being composed of smaller cellular units, many cellular units producing large size. So because energy-producing proteins or transport proteins are in the cell membrane, cells must be small. And this is just a geometrical sort of feature of life on Earth, which is cellular.